It is day 4,536 of Boswell being in business. We are so pleased to welcome back William Kent Krueger, the Edgar Award-winning author of the best-selling novels Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, as well as the much beloved Cork O'Connor series. We're so happy to be working together because originally we're sad, we're happy, we're everything. This event was originally supposed to be 2 events for the William Kent Krueger mini tour through Wisconsin. And we've joined together for one virtual event. And the nice thing about that is this event will now be recorded. We are on Zoom webinar, so you will be able to ask your questions in Q&A, and you can also share your love for William Kent Krueger in chat function. The new event book is Lightning Strike, a powerful prequel to the Cork O'Connor series about fathers and sons, long simmering conflicts and events that echo through youth and shape us forever. Kent Krueger has won high praise from folks like Kristen Hanna, who wrote, Krueger is a master storyteller at the top of his game with Lightning Strike. He's also had raves from booksellers like Boswell's Tim McCarthy and Lisa Baudoin, who will be in conversation with him. He is the author of other Cork O'Connor books, including Desolation Mountain and Sulphur Springs. Remember, this event is being recorded, and we are so lucky to have, I don't know how we hooked her, but we have Lisa Baudoin, the proprietor of Books Company, who, as you know from the reading series, is a delightful conversation partner. You will feel like you are having coffee with the two of them together. I'm so honored to have both of you in the same Zoom. Welcome.
Thank you, Daniel, so much. And welcome, well, we're going to say Kent. So welcome, Kent, very much for being here. And Daniel, you went off the screen. So here we are, and I'm going to change my view because I can only see this one. Okay, there we go. So I was reading your New York Times by the book piece this week, which I thought was fantastic. I'll share a link in case anyone missed it. But I had to laugh when you said you didn't read at night because you kept dozing off and had to. So that happens to me all the time. I think I'm going to read at night and I start dozing off, except this time around, I had to actually change the time that my alarm was set to because I couldn't stop reading your book. And so it kept me up at night. And that was pretty cool to have that happen. I had no problem paying attention. It was such a great story.
I love hearing that, Lisa. Thank you.
And then I had to make myself sleep in. Otherwise, I was going to be groggy and crabby the next morning. And it kept me from all of my chores on Sunday. So, but it was lovely. It was a wonderful place to start after reading This Tender Land. Because I think that there's some nice conversations in between and how the themes sort of, in a way, mirror each other, but offer an alternative for, like, what if this happened instead? What if somebody was actually cared for instead of not cared for? And that was a really interesting for looking at how these boys sort of come of age in both stories.
Oh, that's a really interesting perception there. I missed it, honestly. But you're absolutely right. In This Tender Land, the vagabonds, they don't have that loving parental guidance that Cork and his cohorts have in Lightning Strike. And the parental guidance is so important to us all. And that was one of the things. I'm a father. And I was a son, and so I enjoyed in this book very much exploring that difficult pathway that parents particularly fathers try to give their sons, and sons often resist.
Yeah, and I have 2 sons, and it's that age, that 13, 14, when they kind of start going quiet and start going off on their own. And I think the tendency is to keep them close, but at that age, even I was a lot, I grew up with a lot of freedoms and parental guidance. And it was nice to read a story where you could see not just the parents, but the community guidance that was there for all three boys.
Yeah, you know, I don't think that's a thing of the past, but that's certainly something that apparently that you grew up with, and I definitely grew up with. The idea that we watched out for one another's families, their children. We were kind of, you know, when you lived in your neighborhood, it was a community. And so you felt protected, but also you felt kind of watched. Because
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
if you crossed the line, it got home, you know?
Yeah, when you were writing the prequel, how did it feel different than the other Cork books? Did it feel more like a standalone and this being able to investigate? Because Cork's been around for a long time. You've worked through so many different stuff. And to come back and sort of sit with this past and bring it forward.
You know, that's an interesting question, Lisa. And I think you're absolutely right. There are elements in this that felt very standalone-ish
Yeah.
because Cork is different. You know, he's the same Cork, but this is like he's on a different island here. He's not on the mainland. He's on an island. And so it was, I have to tell you, it was just an extraordinarily enjoyable experience writing this book. I thought it might be hard, but maybe the writing of This Tender Land made it a little bit easier because I was still in the mindset of adolescent males. And so it was really easy for me to capture Cork's voice and Cork's thinking at that age as so many things are beginning to dawn on him. And God, I loved exploring that. But I have to say it was that part, writing the characters, writing the relationships was the easiest part of this book. And that just flowed. The hardest part of this book was constructing the mysteries because I really wanted to talk about the relationships, but I needed the good mystery construct that every reader expects in order to be able to do that. And that's really what took the most work for me in Lightning Strike. I have to be honest with you. Plot interests me less than all of the other narrative elements of a story. I love writing character. I love writing sense of place. I love creating atmosphere. I love just striving for the powerful language to use in telling the story. But you got to have a plot, you know?
But you can use all of those skills to sort of cover some of the twists and turns. So we're looking and we're enjoying this and we're getting all the feels. And all of a sudden you're like, wait. This was that moment. This was that thing I should have paid attention to.
Do you know that comes finally after 20 years or 25 years now of writing mysteries. I always have a sense of where in the story things need to occur so that, you know, so you're writing, when I teach writing, this is what I teach, mystery writing. You bring your reader into the flow of the story. It's like inviting your reader into a river. And you know, like people standing at the beginning of a river, they don't have any real reason to follow you along that river. So you have to give them a reason. And so usually I'll have that hook prologue or hook chapter to pull them in. And then I give them everything, the setting, the characters, the language, and they're floating along. But that would be a pretty boring trip. So then you give them the twist and going, oh, wait a minute, this river isn't going where I thought it was. And you give them a few rapids and they're going, wow, this is kind of exciting. And then you give them another twist. And yeah, I love doing that.
Yeah, and it's hard because I want to carefully ask questions without spoilers, but you set us up with a mystery in the very beginning because we know right away about the clock tower and the bullet. And so we know that right away, but you're just like, you've got this other piece coming in and then you have that one. And I'm like, when is this going to happen? What's going to happen? When is this going to happen? Is it now? Is it now? Is it now?
Oh, I love that. You know, I really didn't set up the opening chapter in which Cork, having finally become sheriff himself, is wearing the sheriff's badge for the first time and begins to ruminate on the relationship he had with his father, who, and I'm giving nothing away here, was killed in the line of duty when Cork is an adolescent. but I never thought it would be one of those things where a reader would going, oh, when is it going to happen? Oh, when is it going to happen? I knew when it was going to happen.
Not me. Let's talk a little bit about the characters, because there's Liam, Cork's father, and his mother, Colleen. And Colleen is half I knew I was going to do this while I was on the phone.
Anishinaabe, half Anishinaabe.
I know this. And it's you. So, and then, oh, see, I'm getting all nervous because I messed up once. But then grandma's in the scene, and then you're building these spaces in the very beginning of how that relationship started and the tension between the res and the town, between Aurora and Alouette. And so those are the characters. And then Cork has his friendships. And one of them is in town, and one of them was with a boy that lived on the res who's been since moved to California and comes back, and how those bonds build. And that's the kind of the world that they're operating in with one of Liam's friends in there. And it's such a comfortable space. You know, that all their relationships are so fleshed out and they're so good, and they get so upset with each other too.
Well, one of the things I wanted, there were two important things I wanted. There were a lot of important things I wanted to talk about in this story, but a couple of them were this. How, when an event occurs, the truth of that event is different depending upon the perspective from which it's viewed. And so you have this important death of an Ojibwe elder, and the white populace of Tamarack County sees it one way, and the Ojibwe of the Iron Lake Reservation see it in an entirely different way. And so we have this conflict in which Cork's family, and particularly his father, finds himself caught as he tries to sort out the truth of that death. And then Cork gets involved as well, because that's what boys do. So I wanted to talk about the conflict that arises from two different views of exactly the same thing, two different ideas of what the truth is. And I wanted to talk about conflict within a family then, because conflict arises in every family. It's just a natural part of, that familial relationship. But conflict doesn't have to drive families apart, except that Cork, as he is now becoming aware of the world in an entirely different way, becomes really concerned that maybe, in fact, this is something that could divide his family forever, or in ways that would just be devastating to them. And so that's what I wanted to talk about: conflict and those differing perspectives of truth.
And you did a really wonderful job with Cork's dad, Liam, sort of working in some of the contemporary issues, social issues that we're working through now, and placing them there. And I just really appreciated it. It was a nice whisper to remind us that we've been working through these things for a long time, and we will continue to find our way and find the love in our families too. Yeah. And learn. Liam learns.
When we're talking about cultural differences, particularly, we all need to understand that everybody sees the world in a different way. And we really need to be able to open ourselves to ideas that are very different from our own ideas. And Lisa, we're going to be working on that one forever.
A long time. And so in the story, you have a bookstore and a bookseller. And I loved this part of it. And it just sort of emphasized the importance of story and how we view the world. And in these, with this story that you've written, as a bookseller, I can put it in hands and know that those are going to be a story that will change somebody's perspective. And however slight or however large, it moves the needle a little bit.
Yeah, the bookseller in this story really doesn't make a huge appearance, but her influence is profound on Cork. I mean, she puts great books into Cork's hands. And I have to tell you honestly, the books that I have Cork reading are the books that I read and loved read over and over again as a kid. Let me tell you just a little bit about the bookseller and the
Tell
bookstore
us.
in Lightning Strike. So in Lightning Strike, the bookstore in the little town of Aurora is called A Novel Idea, and the owner of the bookstore is a woman named Sandy Heron. And Sandy Heron is very real, and the Novel Idea was her bookstore for many, many years before she had to give up the brick and mortar store and do her work online. But Sandy, one of the things that you do at conferences, very often a conference will hold an auction to raise money for some literary endeavor. And a couple of years ago at BoucherCon, the International Mystery Convention, I put up a character name as an auction item, and Sandy Heron won the character name. And so I made Sandy the bookstore owner, and I put her bookstore in there, and I just had a delightful time doing that.
It was really fun to see, and it was a nice, for readers and for booksellers, it's a nice place to be to see how those stories do impact. Yeah, that was fun. Somebody has a question here. If you could hypothetically take what you know now about writing and constructing stories, how might you potentially use that to reframe, reshape your writing approach to the first book in Cork's series, Iron Lake? So would you go back? Would you change it?
There was only one thing I would change about Iron Lake. A few years ago, my publisher decided they were going to abandon the mass market size books and go to trade editions, so the larger trade editions. And when they did that, I decided I was going to go back and reread every book that I'd written up to that point with an idea of blogging about all of the errors that I'd made, the mistakes that I thought I'd made as a storyteller, things that I might do differently. But you know what happened, Lisa? In the end, I just found myself thinking, well, this guy's a pretty good writer. And honestly, the only thing I would change in the whole series is the name of the town, Aurora. I would call it something different for this reason. There is a real Aurora, Minnesota, not far from where my fictional Aurora is. And it's confusing for people who know the North Country when they go, well, that doesn't seem anything like Aurora. Well, no, that's because I've created my own Aurora for the story. But I would give the town a different name. But that's honestly, the only change I would make. I think I was really fortunate in that I had a good sense in the 4 years it took me to write Iron Lake. I came up with a pretty good sense of how you need to structure a mystery, and I pretty much stayed with that structure all the way through the whole series.
Well, I'm curious too, just being with Cork as an adult so long, and then come back and think about what formed him as a kid, and to try and write those parts of it into a mystery. Was it something you've been working on for a long time, or did it?
Actually, I wrote this pretty much at almost the insistence of my my agent. For years, she's been after me to write a prequel because very often across the course of the earlier 17 novels in the series, I have often made reference to events in Cork's younger years that and people in Cork's younger life that have influenced him tremendously. And my agent has been telling me forever, there's rich territory here. You need to mine that territory and explore those relationships and events more deeply. And finally, I really didn't have another idea for a Cork O'Connor novel, although I had a contractually obligated book that I had to turn in at some point. So I thought, well, let's give the prequel a try. I am so happy that she encouraged me to do this because I had such a great time exploring Cork as a kid. And again, I have to say, Cork came to me easily. I know him as a man, and who he was as an adolescent just came to me very, very fluidly.
Well, that's kind of what I was wondering, is if it was just felt very natural because you've known him for so long.
Maybe that's it, because I do know him so well. His who he was as a kid didn't surprise me in the least. The relationships, some of the relationships surprised me, particularly the harshness of Grandma Dilsey when she's dealing with Liam. She is really putting forward a very profound very stern image, the Ojibwe side of things. She doesn't cut Liam a lot of slack, and rightly so, because he has an important part to play in the justice that will or will not occur.
And you also give very clear reasons why. I think she's very clear. Maybe it was Colleen that's very clear as to why she's so upset. Just the continual distrust and lack of representation or protecting that has happened.
As was very often the case, and probably still is very often the case, law enforcement in Tamarack County always fell on the side of the white population. And so the Native population simply felt there was no justice among the white law enforcement or in white courts. And so that's Colleen's fear. Once again, we're going to see a situation in which what is white prevails, and what may in fact be true will never come to light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I grew up, and Daniel always laughs because this always comes up, but I grew up in a small community outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Oh. And so these tensions were very familiar to me. And you just know it, you just feel it. And you did a nice, you captured that well.
Well, again, conflict is what drives great stories. And so it was imperative that I create that sense of conflict without beating the reader over the head with it, because there's a lot more going on than simply that. But yeah, I tried to, as clearly as I could, suggest that conflict is a significant and an important one, and not just so in the whole scheme of things. To Cork, to his father, to his mother, to grandmother, and to his grandma Dilsey, the emotional anchor of the story.
Really alive too. I mean, you could feel that. You could, yeah. Here's a question from Doug too. Alternately, what have been some of the most important sources of knowledge for Native and Ojibwe peoples and cultures when you're writing and informing your work?
When I decided I was going to write the Cork O'Connor series, and that I was going to include the Ojibwe as an element of my stories, I knew about the Ojibwe pretty much what every white person knows about the Native cultures we live shoulder to shoulder with: nothing. But I was a cultural anthropology major in college, and so the idea of learning about this culture that was unfamiliar to me was an exciting proposition. And I began my learning really in a very academic way. I began by reading. I read everything I could get my hands on. I read the early ethnographies, William Warren and Francis Densmore. I read the Shinab authors who write about myth, Gerald Visnor, ritual, Basil Johnson. I read the Shinab storytellers, Jim Northrup, Louis Zebridge. And when I thought I had a pretty good grasp of the Ojibwe culture, then I began to write Iron Lake. In the course of all of my research, I began to meet and form relationships with members inside the Ojibwe community, relationships that have become important friendships to me over time. And so they continue to help me in my perspective and perception of the Ojibwe culture, which I have come to admire tremendously. I mean, we have the Ojibwe culture, like so many Native cultures here. It's ancient, it's complex, it's rich. And one of the things that I love about all my friends in the Native community is they have great sense of humor. And it's like, we did, our European ancestors did their best to eradicate the Native people. They didn't succeed. And the Native people here they are, and they haven't lost their sense of humor. And they really stand firm these days in preserving their culture, preserving their language. I so admire them on so many levels.
Oh gosh, I think it's been about 22 years ago, the art museum at the University of Minnesota did an exhibit of Native humor. It was Thomas King was the curator. Did you happen to see it?
I did not, but I'm sorry I didn't.
Oh, it was fantastic. It was all these photographs. And he himself wrote Green Grass, Running Water. Was that the novel that he wrote? Is so funny. And this was a great great exhibit that just covered some of his photographs and then other Native artists and their humor. And you're right, it's quite a tradition.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way that I don't think people, it shouldn't surprise us. It doesn't surprise me, but I don't think we give that. That is not, part of our image.
Yeah. Yeah. What can I say?
I know. I mean, I sound like I'm like, well, yeah, of course they're going to be funny, but I don't know why we would even be surprised. But it was such a great exhibit that just opened up your eyes, and yeah, I wish I had a book I could share of it. So,
yeah, I have nothing to add to that one, Lisa.
I know. I lost my train of thought here, but so when you did all of that, what I appreciate is that there's always that space that you write where the cultures do come together, and we need to tell that story and be, talk about that story so we can break some of those barriers down in the understanding. And you did a great job doing that. And the Boundary Waters and the Scenes in Nature, were you a Boy Scout?
Absolutely, I was a Boy Scout. I was 2 merit badges shy of being an Eagle.
And was it up in the Midwest that you were a scout then, that you were out doing?
Yeah, mostly the Midwest. That was when I lived in Ohio.
Okay.
And then I continued my scout training in Oregon when I moved out there. Yeah, scouting, unfortunately, is taking it on the chin these days. And, we all probably should have been much more aware of the potential for trespass than we were. But I have to say that my scouting years and my scouting experience was just a great joy, and in many, many ways prepared me quite well for my entrance into manhood. What can I say? I had a joyful experience as a Boy Scout.
Well, and the skills that scouts represent are something that can be, used and worked with for many people. So
yeah, Cork is a scout. If you remember this tender land, Odie and his brother Albert are also Boy Scouts. I put the scouts in there whenever I think is appropriate for it.
And it's great because they both all sort of, stop and they get prepared, and they, Cork has his Spam and his cheese.
That's right.
He's ready to eat on his overnight.
Be prepared, the motto of a Boy Scout.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I loved about, Cork's childhood in some ways was like my childhood. And so Cork has pretty loving parents. I had pretty loving parents. Cork was a Boy Scout. I was a Boy Scout. Cork has paper routes. I delivered papers when I was in my adolescence too. That was the first regular job I ever had, delivering paper routes. I had paper routes in the morning and I had paper routes in the afternoon. And my father was a high school English teacher, so we didn't have a lot of money. So as kids, we had to bring in our own money. So I tell you, my paper route was a great source of income for me. I bought my first bicycle like Cork does with my paper route money.
I did a short stint on a paper route when we moved to Pella, Iowa, and I had 2 infants. Well, 2 young kids. One was a year and one was 3. And my husband at the time had to go on a trip. He was a professor. He had to go to some conference. So I was like the first weekend I was delivering the paper, and you drove the route. So you drove down the street, you parked your car, and then you ran the route. And then the kids were in the car, and it was like this time of the year, and all of the decks were slippery, and everybody, like, I imagine that you just put the paper in the yard, and you had to put it behind the door or in the garage door or on the deck. And I got home after that first day, and there was like 5 calls because I didn't put it in the right place. And I can just remember sliding across somebody's deck trying to get fast. I lasted 1 week. It was the hardest job I ever had.
And if you screwed up, you didn't put the paper in the right place.
It's terrible.
You didn't get a tip when you went to collect for the paper. Yeah.
No, they left not a very nice message.
I'm sure there are lots of folks out there who had paper routes when they were kids. You know exactly what we're talking about.
I think you need to be a kid, not a 35-year-old woman. Or 30, yeah. But I'm a much better bookseller. When you were, I think about this and the themes in the story and just the coming of age, but also the boys and the kids working their way together as groups. I read in the past, like one of your favorite books is To Kill a Mockingbird. And this kind of felt that sort of that sense, the father struggling with this big thing and the kids sort of trying to figure out what was going on. Did you feel that influence coming through?
Not consciously in this one. That's certainly To Kill a Mockingbird was a huge influence when I was writing Ordinary Grace. But I felt that a little bit less here. I have to tell you honestly, more here, the influence was a novella by Stephen King called The Body, from which the movie Stand By Me was made.
Okay.
It's one of the best, I think, evocations of adolescent male relationships that you're ever going to read. It's just a terrific novella. And so the creation of this relationship that the three boys have is, that every guy you talk, I don't know what it's like for women 12, 13 years of age, but those are really important relationships for guys. The end of the movie Stand By Me contains the line, the last line of the movie isn't in the book, but it sums it up perfectly. The last line of the movie goes something like this: I've never had better friends than I had when I was 12 years old. Jesus, does anybody?
Yeah. Yeah. And do you stay in touch with the friends that you had when you were 12?
Nah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was a nomad when I was a kid. The
Mhm.
friends that I had at 12, 13 years of age, I left behind and moved on. And then I formed new friendships there, and then I moved on. So, I never had those lifelong friendships that many people have. But since I've become a writer, a published writer, um, and have a Facebook presence, a lot of people from my past have come out of the woodwork, and am making now connections, um, reconnecting threads that have been broken for decades.
Yeah, and that must be really interesting too, to hear the stories and the things that have happened in between.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody became a different person than I imagined they would become. The schmucks were no longer schmucks. They actually created wonderful lives for themselves.
Yeah, and I avoid my high school reunions too. And
Oh,
we
really?
moved, yeah, we moved when I was around 10 or 12, and then went to a different school, and then went to a different school after that. So I was sort of a nomad in that same sort of way. Yeah.
Yeah, but that experience for me, that nomadic experience for me, helped me inform one of the characters, one of the kids, a little more fully. Billy Downwind is a native kid, and as a result of the relocation, let me explain the Relocation Act of
Yeah,
1956
please.
for people out there. It's an important element of the story. In 1956, the government, in its wisdom, passed the Relocation Act. And what it did was it offered Native families the opportunity, should they choose to leave the reservation, of traveling to an urban center. Um, being the government would help them pay for their travel, would help them find housing, would train them, help them find a job. On the surface of it, it seemed like just a wonderful opportunity. Well, no, because what happened was none of those promises were kept. The families did, in fact, uproot themselves, and they moved to these urban areas very far away. But what they found when they got there was the housing was really substandard housing. The job training was non-existent. The jobs they got were menial jobs. They were separated from anyone else in their native community. They were among other cultures. None of them really related well. Um, and so what it really accomplished probably was what the purpose of it, in fact, was to shatter Native communities. In fact, many Native communities vanished as a result of the Relocation Act because everybody left. It was a hugely divisive issue. And so Billy Downwind's family is among those who have taken the opportunity to move to California, where Billy Downwind sees all of the lies that the government has told them. But so many of the families had no money to get back to the reservation, so they were stuck there. Or if they did come back to the res, they were often not greeted in an amicable way because they left. So Billy Downwind feels in an alien country, really, in California. He goes out to Los Angeles. And so, I felt that so many times when I was moving around as a kid. Well, here I am in a new landscape. I don't know anybody. I don't know what the culture is here. So I have to figure out how to get by. And that's Billy Downwind.
He was a good character, and he goes back to California, and I think about, where that friendship is going to go and what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the story, at the end of the book, folks, I sort of tell you that. So I won't tell you that now.
Well, you don't tell us completely. I didn't spoil too much. But you just don't. Yeah. No. Boy, I hate when I do that and give a spoiler. That wasn't too bad of a spoiler.
No, it wasn't a spoiler at all.
Are you working on something right now?
I'm putting the finishing touches on the next book in the Cork O'Connor series, book number 19. It will be out this time next year, fall of 2022, probably August of 2022. I believe it's going to be called Anger Bay. And for readers who have followed the Cork O'Connor series and read Desolation Mountain, you may remember that at the end of Desolation Mountain, I left Henry Malou in a rather precarious situation. Both Henry Malou at the end of Desolation Mountain and Stephen O'Connor have had visions of Henry's death. So with Anger Bay, I pick up that thread and we find out what happens to Henry. And that's all I'm going to say.
And you have to wait a whole nother year.
I have to wait another year. Then I'm going to go back to the work I've already begun on the next standalone novel, which will be a companion to both Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land. I don't have a title for it yet, but it will be set in southern Minnesota, in the Minnesota River Valley, around my fictional town of New Bremen, and it will be set in an earlier day, as were Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land. And the earlier work I've done on it, I'm just so stoked with this story. Can't wait to get back to it.
Well, that must be really fun.
Writing is nothing but fun as far as I could. When I am talking to writers, one of the things I tell them is, if you're not enjoying yourself as a writer, it's a little bit like writing is a little bit like sex. If you're not enjoying yourself, you're probably not doing it right,
Well, that's true, because it should be enjoyable.
It should be. I absolutely agree. That doesn't mean that you don't struggle sometimes.
Right.
Because if you're really reaching, if you're really trying to grow, if you're really trying to do different things, there will be struggle involved. But that doesn't mean that it has to be painful. It's just a challenge, a wonderful challenge. That's how I look at it anyway.
So what's been some of the fun research sort of trips or explorations that you've had to take for this one that we're doing now, Lightning Strike, but the other two that are in the works?
Well, I keep having to go up north. Whenever I set a novel up north, I try to be in the North Country in the season in which the story takes place. So I know, what are the colors like? What are the smells like? What does the air feel like? What are people wearing? What are people talking about? All of that. So I keep going up to the North Country as much as I can to do that location research. I continue to read all of my all of the Ojibwe resources that I have. Keep reading online as much about Indian country as I can, so that if there are issues that are important in the Native community, I want to know about them. And the book Anger Bay, in fact, does talk about an important issue, and not just to an issue not just important to the Native people, but to us all. But that's all I'm going to say about it. Yeah. So that's pretty much the research. It hasn't been as exciting maybe as the research I did for This Tender Land. When I wrote a story about 4 vagabonds being out there on the rivers, I kayaked and canoed those rivers, so I would know what the kids were experiencing. Haven't done that for either Lightning Strike or Anger Bay.
You didn't go canoeing up in the Boundary Waters of this last time?
I've often gone canoeing up in the Boundary Waters.
Yeah.
So yeah, fall back on all the canoeing experiences that I've had up there. You know, when I write about set scenes in the Boundary Waters, um, I am using real places that I have been. I don't necessarily give them the same names because I monkey with geography a lot, but I always have in mind, oh, okay, let's use this place for this particular scene. So I can see it in my mind. I can close my eyes. I can see where the rocks are. If it's a lake, I can see where the island is. I can see if it's an island with if it's just a barren island or if there are pine trees on it, if it's a large island, a small island, all of these things. So yeah.
Tough research.
Oh God! Again, another reason I love what I do.
I
And
was
you know,
gonna say.
when I go up north for research, it's a tax write-off. So I love that about it too.
That's really nice. I would go up north quite a bit then.
As often as I can. You know, I don't get up there as much as I used to because I do a lot of traveling around the country to promote my
Mhm.
work. And so I don't get up there quite as much as I used to. Plus, I'm 70 years old. It's a little more challenging for me to do the portages than it used to be.
Yeah, yeah, and that's hard too for up there because those portages are challenging.
Oh, they certainly can be. They can kill you. I mean, quite literally. If you talk to the rangers up there, generally speaking, the only people that they ever have to bring out of the Boundary Waters are old guys like me who think they're in better shape than they are, and they end up having a heart attack on a portage.
Oh, no. So here's another question. Hemingway said that he had a good day of writing if he got 200 words right. What do you consider a good day of writing?
You know, Hemingway was pretty picky in what he considered right. So he wrote very, very carefully. You know, I never have kept seriously a word count or a page count for my daily routine. I write 7 days a week. I get up every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and spend the first 2 or 3 hours writing. But it's never been important to me in terms of a page count or a word count. What's more important to me is that when I begin the work, I have a sense of what I want to accomplish, the scene, or where I want the story to be, kind of when I finish my stint for the day. And sometimes it takes me 2 hours to kind of get to that point. Sometimes it takes me a little longer. Or sometimes I know I'm going to extend it over 2 days. And so I use an old Hemingway technique. Hemingway loved to stay connected to the work. And so he would often stop his writing, even in the middle of a sentence, knowing exactly the word or how he wanted that sentence to end, so that when he went to work at the next morning, he didn't have to like try to figure out where the hell he was. He would just pick it up and move on. So when I end at the end of the day, I want to end with an idea of what am I going to do tomorrow? So I don't have to just sit there sipping my coffee going, what the hell's going to happen now? Although
That's
every
a,
once in a while that happens.
you get stuck.
Yeah.
Have you always been, when I read your stories, they just have such a oral feel to them, an oral tradition of like I can hear you telling a story and describing it. Did you tell a lot of stories to the kids when they were little?
Yeah, when we put the kids down at night, the kids always wanted their mom to read to them, but they would always demand a story from me.
Mm.
And I was more than willing to oblige because I would always make them characters in the stories, and they absolutely loved that, as did I. So yeah, I never read to my kids. I created stories for them instead. Which,
Did,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, did they continue like they had certain characters that just evolved after? Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, they were what all the kids and I referred to as the house on the moor stories. So there was a house on the moor surrounded by this mysterious, atmospheric sort of very English kind of setting, and all the characters living in the house on the moor, and there was always something a little woo woo about each of the characters.
Did you have that growing up? Did you have a lot of storytelling when you were growing up?
Now, I had a lot of reading done to me when I was growing up.
Okay.
Both my father and my mother, but particularly my father, he was a high school English teacher. and he was always reading to us when we went to bed at night. And honestly, the things that my brothers and my sister and I loved the most was when my father would read poetry to us. He would read those great story poems, The Charge of the Light Brigade, The Highwayman, Little Orphan Annie, The Raven. And so I grew up on this great tradition of hearing those stories read, the story poems read. So and I'm sure this is something that a lot of writers also do, when I write, I always read out loud what I've written so that I can hear how it sounds, so I can hear the rhythm of it, so I can hear the clunk in it.
Yeah, you have that. It has the rhythm, and it flows. Yep. Reminds me of stories like the rhythm my dad had telling stories. So
was he a storyteller?
yes, and he told stories to my kids, the Bobby and Bullet stories. Bobby and his dog Bullet, they had all kinds of adventures, and they would deliver groceries in their wagon all around town. And yes, and he grew up in southern Minnesota. And
oh, that's terrific. Was your father from southern Minnesota?
He his parents were, and then he grew up in New Mexico.
Okay.
So, but there was always those stories that he would tell that were based in the little town of Hayfield or Rochester. Yeah.
Did he ever write those stories down?
No, but my mom would record them. So we have the recordings, the Bobby and Bullet stories.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. But I think that is such a tradition. It's such a, to read out loud to kids, to read out loud to each other as adults even. It's important.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but my favorite teachers in elementary school were the ones who read to me or read to us. I had Tom Sawyer read to me in the 5th grade, and I loved that book. I had Charlotte's Web read to me. I had, just book after book after book read to me. And oh my God, what an important thing for me, and I'm certain for all of my classmates.
Yeah. Yeah, they say that it's really it's good for our brains.
Yeah. Reading in general is good for your brain.
Storytelling, yes, all of it. But I think these two, you're just reading them out loud if you're in a car trip or, anytime, just reading out loud to each other as adults is really nice.
Well, you pointed out that I don't read at night when I go to bed because I go to sleep too quickly. But for years, my wife and I would read to each other in bed at night. And it was because it would help me stay awake when I was either reading or listening to the story. Yeah, and I loved that. I don't know why we don't do that anymore, but we don't do that anymore.
You fall asleep. She falls asleep now.
Yeah, right. We're 70. We both fall asleep.
So what are you reading now?
I just finished.
In the summer.
Yeah, I just finished a terrific advanced reader's copy, an ARC, of a book that's not going to be out there. Probably might even be for a whole nother year, which is too bad because I just think it's a terrific book. We have a really wonderful crime writer here in the Twin Cities, a guy named Matt Goldman. He has written a series of books, but the book I read is a standalone. His first, I think it's his first standalone. It's called Carolina Moonset. It's set in South Carolina, and a stunning sense of place. The dialogue is just wonderfully snappy. Characters you really care about. An interesting mystery at the heart of it. It was just it for me. It hit on all cylinders. So when it comes out a year from now, watch for Carolina Moonset.
And it's Matt Goldman. I have that written
Matt
down.
Goldman, right?
Yep.
MATT, Matt Goldman, as Goldman sounds. I also, let's see, I just finished reading Jim Henson, the biography, because we're going to be discussing it in the book group that I lead in September. And on my nightstand, actually on my coffee table, because I don't read at night, is the next book that I'm going to be reading to discuss with my book group, a book I'm really looking forward to, The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek.
Oh yeah, we've done really well with that.
Yeah, I've just heard wonderful things about it.
So how many people are in your book group?
We have anywhere from 15 to 20.
Okay. And is it through a store or is it just a group of friends or?
It's my church.
Oh, fun. That's great.
I led this book group for more than a quarter of a century. And you know, we don't, it's not like we read spiritual texts all the time. Like last year, you know, we try to choose a kind of a theme. Last year, we read one book by every one of America's Nobel laureates in literature. And that was a very interesting experience. We all decided that, you know, a Nobel Prize winning novel isn't necessarily the most compelling read in the world.
We have a lot of book groups that are based out of a church.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's just as a social gathering spot. Yeah, it's really nice to see. And then that great selections of books being read.
Yeah, you know, I am so impressed and pleased to see how many book groups exist across our country. Since the pandemic set in, I've Zoomed with probably 300 different book groups, both here and internationally. And I'm impressed with their passion for books, the community that results when you all gather together to drink wine and talk about books. I just love that.
Yeah, it is. It's a great gathering space, and I'm glad it's going strong through the pandemic too, and still going strong. Yeah, and they think that we've stopped reading, but I don't think that's true. I think people still read.
I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah.
You know, I think maybe one of the silver linings of the pandemic is people have returned to the joy of reading. You know, they've had enough streaming, they've had enough Netflix, enough Prime. I just want to do something that really engages me again in an active way. And reading really is an active pursuit, I think. Your brain is just working and enjoying the work.
Yeah, and so many of those movies and things that are being made now are all based on books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just go to the source.
There you go. We all know that a book is infinitely better than the movie.
Oh, right, exactly. And it's fun sometimes to we used to do, I had classes where we'd read a novel, but not watch a movie, but it wouldn't be the movie wouldn't be of the novel. They would just be a conversation between the two based sort of on a theme. And that was always really fun.
Yeah.
To do. So, well, Ken, this has been really, really delightful.
Oh, I've had a lot of fun, Lisa. Thanks so much.
Yeah. And
there's Daniel.
Yes, he's back. And I love this book. If you guys haven't started this series, this is such a perfect way to step in.
Can I give myself a shout out?
Please do.
Lightning Strike debuted at #5 on the New York Times bestseller list.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was pretty pleased. This was the best debut appearance for any of my Cork O'Connor novels.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Your agent was right. You had to write the prequel.
I'm going to send her flowers, Daniel.
Don't worry, don't forget, we both have signed book plates. If you look in the chat, there are links to purchase the book and some of the other books that Lisa and Ken talked about, including the very popular book on Native American humor that came out earlier this year.
Wow.
Oh, thank you.
Yep. And also just another mention, I know we were originally going to have the author in person and we were going to have actual signed copies instead of book plates. We are not able to do that. However, Ken's local store is Once Upon a Crime, and they are able to offer that. And they are a fellow independent bookstore, and we love, if you do need a special inscription, you can just order from them and probably put it in the comment section. And one day we'll have an author that they send people to us to. Maybe.
That is so generous, Daniel. Thank you.
Well, it's also helping some of our customers who just need the signed copy. So I'm so glad that we can calm them down. So thank you both. Thank you, Lisa. What a wonderful conversation. Congratulations again, and on #5, and thank you for a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Lisa.
much.
Take care, everybody.